Jack stood at the edge of the lush alien jungle, staring into the dense green foliage where strange sounds echoed like whispers, and the air hummed with the pulse of an unfamiliar world. His boots sank slightly into the damp ground with each step he took as he observed the landscape in front of him. It was beautiful yet unsettling, the kind of beauty that made you question what might be hiding just out of sight. The sun barely pierced through the thick canopy above, casting patches of golden light on the uneven earth. Jack adjusted the strap of his pack over his shoulder and took a deep breath, feeling the odd scent of the planet fill his lungs. It smelled of fresh rain and something sweet like nectar. Though it was far from any flower he had seen before, the journey had not been easy. He had come to this world in search of diplomatic relations between Earth and the mysterious species that inhabited this planet, a race known only as Ipsan. They were reclusive and secretive, and their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. The Ipsan had never shown much interest in communication with other species, preferring isolation, which was why Jack had been selected to venture into their domain and establish some kind of connection. There were no guarantees that the mission would succeed, but Jack had always believed in the power of human connection to bridge any gap. The Ipsan were rumored to have the ability to see into the hearts of others, to understand emotions without words, to sense the truth of an individual with a depth no human could even imagine. But now, as Jack stood in the wild undergrowth of the planet, something about the situation felt off. He couldn't explain it, but it was as though something had shifted in the air, as if he was no longer simply an explorer, but a witness to something far greater than himself. A flicker of movement caught his eye at the edge of the trees. Jack froze instinctively, his hand reaching for the small communication device on his wrist. As he slowly scanned the surroundings, his breath caught in his throat when he saw her standing between two towering trees. A woman whose skin shimmered like the scales of a fish, catching the sunlight. Her hair flowed around her like liquid silver, and her eyes were the color of the ocean, reflecting the entire world within them. She was beautiful in a way that felt unnatural, as though she were not quite human, yet perfectly familiar. Her presence was mesmerizing and disorienting at the same time. Jack's mind raced as he wondered if this was a trick or some kind of mirage. But she didn't move. Instead, she just stared at him, her gaze unwavering. It was as if she was studying him with a deep and ancient understanding. Jack swallowed hard, his thoughts scrambled as he fumbled for something to say, but his voice failed him in that moment. The only sound that filled the air was the soft rustle of leaves and the steady pulse of his heartbeat. He felt as though he had been placed under a spell, as though the entire world had quieted just to let him be in this moment with her. When she finally spoke, her voice was a melodic hum, almost like a song, but her words were strange, alien, and yet familiar. They resonated in his chest like an echo, a sound that vibrated in a part of him he didn't know existed. She wasn't speaking in any language he understood yet. Somehow he knew what she was saying. Human. The word rolled off her tongue, as though she had tasted it before. Jack took a step forward, but hesitated, unsure if he should approach or stay back. The stories about the Ipsan had warmed their cold and distant nature. Some said they could read minds or manipulate emotions. Others whispered of their uncanny ability to see past any disguise. But in the presence of this woman, all of those warnings seemed irrelevant. All he could think about was how deeply curious he was to learn more about her and about her kind. The moment stretched between them like a bridge that had yet to be crossed. But Jack knew one thing for certain: whatever was about to happen next would change everything he had ever known about the universe. Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Zilara's gaze was piercing and strange, yet it felt welcoming in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if she had seen him before, even though they had never met. Her eyes seemed to hold a depth of knowledge far beyond what his human mind could grasp. But he couldn't back away now. He had come too far. He had to make the first move. So he took a step closer, his boots sinking into the soft earth beneath him. Every step a quiet reminder that he was on foreign soil, that the unknown was watching him. He reached into the small pack strapped to his side, pulling out the carved wooden figure, the bird. It was simple, something his mother had taught him to make when he was younger. It was a symbol of peace and of humanity's connection to the earth and its creatures, a small gesture, a gift given without expectation. but something in his gut told him it was the right thing to do now. He extended it toward her, his hand shaking slightly as he offered the wooden bird, a symbol of goodwill and kindness. The silence between them stretched long like the calm before a storm. Zilara didn't move for several moments. She simply stared at the figure. Jack could feel his heart pounding in his chest, a quick rhythmic beat that echoed in his ears. He had no idea what she thought, or if she even understood the gesture to her. It might be completely meaningless, but he hoped it wasn't. Hope was all he had left when faced with the unknown. Then, without warning, she reached out with a slow, deliberate motion, her fingers brushing against the wood. Jack felt a strange heat rush through him as her touch made contact. It was a light touch, but the sensation sent a shiver down his spine. It was like the wood was alive under her touch, like it was something more than just an object, something connected to her in ways he couldn't understand. As Zilara examined the bird, her eyes softened, and Jack could see a flicker of something in them, something that wasn't there before. It was like she was looking at something far away, something ancient, something lost in time. Her expression changed slowly from confusion to something else, an emotion he couldn't quite place. She blinked, as though she had just woken from a dream, and then a quiet gasp escaped her lips. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the bird in both of her palms, now as though cradling it with the utmost care. Jack felt his stomach tighten with uncertainty. What was happening? Was this a good sign or a terrible one? He had no way of knowing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke a single word. It was strange, like a melody, sung in a language he didn't understand yet. Somehow he knew the meaning of the word. Without her explaining it, it resonated with him deeply, the way music reaches into the soul without needing to be heard. The prophecy. Her voice trembled as she repeated it again, as if the words had been hidden for centuries, and now they had found their way to the surface. Jack stared at her, unable to fully comprehend the significance of what she had said. She turned the bird over in her hands, her eyes focused on the intricate carvings. Then slowly she looked back up at him, as if seeing him for the first time, truly seeing him. Her gaze seemed to pierce through him with an intensity that made him feel naked, as though she could see everything about him, everything he had ever been, everything he could become. She didn't speak again, but Jack felt something shift in the air around them. It was as if the world had taken a breath, holding itself in place, waiting for something to happen. He couldn't tell what it was, but the moment felt electric. He stood frozen, watching her as she continued to hold the bird like it was the most precious thing she had ever touched, and Jack wondered if this was the moment he had unknowingly triggered some ancient event, or if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But there was no turning back now. He had given her the gift, and whatever came next would be out of his hands. Zilara's fingers tightened around the wooden bird, her eyes never leaving its surface. Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he watched her slowly trace the carvings with a delicate touch. The silence that followed was overwhelming. It stretched between them like an invisible barrier, thick with meaning. But Jack couldn't tell what that meaning was. He could feel his pulse in his ears as he waited for her to speak, for her to do anything but simply stare at the gift in her hands. But she said nothing. She just held the bird as if it had become the center of the universe. Jack shifted uncomfortably, his feet rooted to the spot, his mind racing with 1,000 questions, yet none of them had answers. He wanted to speak again, wanted to ask her what she thought, or if something was wrong. But the words caught in his throat. The air around them seemed to shimmer with an electric charge that left him feeling both exposed and insignificant. He had never felt so out of place, and yet so completely tethered to this strange moment. Her gaze lingered on the bird, and then moved to him for the briefest of moments. Their eyes locked. Jack's breath caught in his chest as he saw something there, something he didn't understand, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a fleeting shadow of something ancient and forgotten. Then, without warning, Zilara dropped to her knees before him. Her movement was swift and graceful, but it took Jack by surprise. His heart skipped a beat as he watched her kneel on the soft earth, her hands still holding the bird pressed gently to her chest. She lowered her head, as though in reverence, her eyes closed, as if she were trying to process what had just happened. Jack stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. She had been distant and enigmatic just moments ago, But now she seemed transformed. Her entire demeanor had shifted. It was as if she had been touched by something far greater than any simple gift he could offer her, something that went beyond his understanding. Zilara remained on her knees for several long moments, her breathing shallow and quick, like she was struggling to hold herself together. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He didn't know if he should offer her comfort or remain silent. It felt like he was witnessing something far beyond the reach of ordinary human experience. Then her voice broke the silence. But it wasn't the soft whisper he had heard before. It was a voice filled with wonder, and all her words were shaky, almost as though they were forced out against her will. I never thought it would come to this, she whispered. Jack's brow furrowed in confusion. What was she talking about? What had he done to make her react this way? He stepped forward, slightly, not wanting to disturb her, but needing to understand more. Zilara, what's happening? He asked gently, his voice careful, but filled with uncertainty. She looked up at him, then her eyes glistening with tears that threatened to spill over. You don't understand, do you? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is not just a gift, it is a prophecy. Jack's heart thudded loudly in his chest. The words hung in the air like a weight he didn't know how to carry. A prophecy, he repeated quietly, almost to himself, as the full weight of her words began to settle over him. Zilara nodded, her eyes fixed on him, as though she could see into the very depths of his soul. Our people have waited for this moment. For centuries we have searched the stars for what you have just given me, without knowing it, without realizing the significance of your gesture. She continued, her voice trembling with emotion. Jack felt a chill creep down his spine, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders like a mantle he had never expected to bear. You're saying this wooden bird means something to you, something far greater than just a gift? He asked, his voice shaky with disbelief. Zilara nodded once more, her eyes never leaving his face. It is not just a gift, Jack. It is the key to something long forgotten, to something our people have long lost touch with, the very thing that once connected us to the universe. She said, her voice growing stronger now, though still filled with wonder. What is it? Jack whispered, feeling the growing weight of the moment press down on him. What had he unwittingly become a part of? Was this just an accident, or something far more profound than he could possibly understand? Zilara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up slowly, her hands still cradling the bird, as though it might slip away if she let go. She took a deep breath, her gaze turning toward the distant horizon, as if looking at something far beyond the world they were standing on. The prophecy speaks of a time when humanity would reach out with a simple act of kindness, and that act would open a door that had long been closed. She said, her voice filled with reverence and awe. Jack felt his chest tighten at her words. A door that had long been closed. What did that even mean? Was he standing on the threshold of something unimaginable, something that could change the course of the universe itself? Zilara's words echoed in Jack's mind like a distant thunderclap. A prophecy was unfolding right before his eyes, but he didn't know what it meant or what his role in it was supposed to be. He was just a human who had made a simple gesture of goodwill, yet somehow that gesture had unlocked something far greater than he could have ever imagined. He watched as Zilara carefully held the wooden bird in both of her hands, as if it were fragile enough to break at any moment. She closed her eyes for a moment, as though trying to gather herself, and Jack felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness wash over him. He didn't know how to process what she had said or what he was supposed to do next. Zilara opened her eyes and turned toward him, her expression serious, yet filled with something Jack couldn't quite place, something both ancient and urgent. She took a deep breath and spoke again, her voice steady but full of emotion. This gift you've given me is not just a token of kindness, Jack. It is the fulfillment of something our people have long believed would come to pass. The prophecy foretold that a human would arrive one day with a gesture so pure, so simple, that it would unlock a force within us that we have not felt in centuries. Her eyes locked onto his, as if searching for something within him, as if she were looking for answers to questions Jack didn't even know he had. But what does it mean, Zilara? What does this prophecy mean for us? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper, the weight of her words pressing on him like a heavy stone. She hesitated for a moment, as though deciding whether or not to share what was in her heart. Then she spoke again, her voice softer now. It means that we are no longer alone, Jack. It means that our people have been waiting for this moment for a long time. And now that it has come, we must face what we've been avoiding for centuries. Jack's head spun with confusion. He had no idea what she was talking about. Avoiding what? He asked, his throat dry as if the air itself had thickened around him. Zalara's gaze softened. And for a moment, Jack saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, something he hadn't expected from someone as composed and powerful as her. We've been hiding, Jack, hiding from the truth of what we once were, what we were meant to be. We abandoned the connection we once had with the stars, with other species, and with ourselves. We turned inward and focused only on our technology and our advancement. We forgot how to connect with others on a deeper level, she said, her voice carrying a sadness that Jack hadn't expected. The weight of her words settled in Jack's chest as he tried to understand the depth of what she was saying. Had humanity truly been part of something greater, something cosmic he couldn't even fathom? You mean we were once connected to your people? Jack asked quietly. Zalara nodded slowly. Yes, before we became so focused on our own progress, we were connected to all living things. We shared knowledge and wisdom with the stars themselves. But we lost that connection over time, and the prophecy says that humanity would be the key to restoring it. She explained, her voice filled with a kind of reverence. Jack felt the ground beneath him shift, as if the very fabric of the universe was changing with each passing second. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. This wasn't just about diplomacy or making peace. This was about the very foundation of life across the stars. Jack looked at her, stunned, his mind racing. He had never imagined that a simple gift could lead to something so monumental. He had never imagined that his role in this story could be so significant. And yet here he was standing on the brink of something that felt like destiny, something that could reshape the galaxy itself. But what was he supposed to do with this knowledge? How was he supposed to help Zalara and her people find their way back to what they had lost? Could a single human really make that kind of difference? What happens now? Jack asked, his voice barely audible. Zalara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned toward the sky, as if seeking guidance from the stars themselves. For a long moment, she simply stood there, looking up at the vast expanse of space above them, her eyes filled with an unspoken sorrow. Then she spoke again, her voice quieter now, but resolute. Now we must begin the journey to reconnect. We will reach out to other species, the ones we once shared knowledge with, and we will begin the long process of healing the fractures that have divided us for so long, she said, turning back to Jack, her eyes burning with a quiet determination. Jack didn't know what this meant for the future or what role he would play in it. But one thing was clear: whatever came next would change everything they had ever known. Zalara's words hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The very air around them seemed to shift and pulse with a strange energy, as though the planet itself was reacting to the revelation he had just witnessed. He had always believed in the power of humanity's potential to change the world. But this was something beyond anything he had imagined. This wasn't just about diplomacy or establishing peaceful relations. This was about something much deeper, something tied to the very essence of existence itself. The thought left him breathless and uncertain. Zalara's eyes remained fixed on him, her gaze unwavering and intense, as if she was searching for something in him, some kind of answer he wasn't sure he could provide. She finally broke the silence, her voice soft, but filled with an undeniable sense of urgency. "We cannot waste any more time, Jack," she said, her words slicing through the tension in the air like a blade. "We have to act now, if we are to fulfill the prophecy, if we are to restore what has been lost." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about restoring peace between two species. This was about restoring an entire civilization to its former glory. This was about saving her people from a self-imposed isolation that had lasted for centuries. And he was at the center of it all, the human who had unknowingly sparked the change that could alter the course of history. But where did that leave him? What was his role in this grand design? Was he merely a messenger or something more? He didn't have the answers. But one thing was clear: there was no turning back now. Zalara reached out, then her hand clasped around his arm, and pulled him gently toward her. The contact was electric. Jack's heart skipped a beat at the touch. It was not just the physical sensation, but something deeper, something he couldn't explain, something that felt ancient and powerful. She spoke again, this time her voice low and serious. "You must come with me, Jack. You must meet the others, the council. They need to know what has happened." Jack nodded slowly, still trying to process everything that had just been revealed. He felt like he had stepped into a world he didn't fully understand, yet one that was calling him to be part of something greater than himself. As they walked through the dense jungle, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes were following their every movement. The trees around them seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, as if the very planet was alive and aware of their presence. The path ahead was unclear, and yet there was a sense of inevitability to it, as if fate itself was guiding their steps. Finally, they reached a clearing in the jungle where a massive structure loomed ahead of them. It was ancient and imposing, made of dark stone that seemed to shimmer faintly in the light of the twin suns above. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an energy that Jack couldn't quite comprehend. Zilara led him to the entrance, where she paused for a moment, her hand resting on the large stone door. She turned to him. Then her eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. Was it fear or hope, or something else entirely? She didn't say anything at first. She simply gave him a steady look, as if preparing him for what he was about to face. Jack swallowed hard and stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. As they entered the temple, the walls inside were adorned with intricate carvings depicting scenes of an ancient civilization, one that looked remarkably similar to the Tsan, yet with elements Jack couldn't place. There were strange symbols and patterns that seemed to pulse with light, as if they were alive with energy. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and something else, something Jack couldn't name. Zilara led him further into the temple until they reached a large chamber where a group of figures stood waiting. They were the council elders of the Tsan, their faces ancient and wise, their eyes filled with the same sense of quiet power Jack had seen in Zilara. His heart raced as they all turned to face him, their gazes intense and unwavering. Zilara spoke first, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is the human who has brought us the gift, who has fulfilled the prophecy," she said, her words echoing in the chamber. Jack felt a sudden wave of heat wash over him as the elders turned their attention to him. They didn't speak right away. Instead, they simply watched him, as if evaluating him, testing him. Jack felt small under their gaze, but he stood tall, meeting their eyes with the same quiet resolve he had always carried with him. He didn't know what was about to happen, or how his actions had set everything in motion. But one thing was clear: this moment was only the beginning of something far bigger than himself. The council elders stood motionless, their presence overwhelming, like ancient statues carved from the rock of time. Jack felt the weight of their gaze pressing down on him. Each one of them seemed to carry an air of silent authority, their eyes searching him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He had never been so acutely aware of being studied, so completely examined by beings who had lived far longer than he could comprehend. Zilara stood beside him, her presence a quiet but steady anchor. As the silence in the chamber stretched, Jack could feel his heart thudding in his chest, a quick, sharp rhythm that filled his ears. He had no idea what these elders were thinking, or what they would do next. All he knew was that this moment felt crucial, like a door was opening, and he was standing on the threshold of something he couldn't yet understand. One of the elders, an older male with deep blue skin and hair that shimmered like starlight, stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, each step measured, as though he had all the time in the universe. The others remained still, watching, waiting. The elder stopped just a few feet away from Jack, his piercing silver eyes locked onto him. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but there was an undeniable weight to it. "Human." He said the word heavy with meaning. Jack felt a strange chill at the sound of it, as though it carried some ancient weight that had been passed down through generations. "You have brought us the key," the elder continued, his gaze never leaving Jack's face. "Do you understand what you have done? Do you understand the responsibility you have placed upon yourself?" Jack swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words felt distant, like they didn't belong to him. He had no idea how to respond. How could he explain what he had done when he barely understood it himself? Instead, he nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I didn't mean to do anything special. I just wanted to offer a gift." he said, his voice quieter than he intended. The elder's expression softened just slightly, but there was no mistaking the deep seriousness in his gaze. A gift, yes, he replied, but not just any gift. This was a symbol of something far greater, something that has been hidden for eons. Solara stepped forward, then her voice strong and unwavering. The prophecy speaks of a time when a human would arrive to bring us the key to our rebirth. Jack's gift has opened that door, she said, her words ringing in the still air. But the question remains, what happens now? What path will we take? The elder turned his gaze to Zilara, and for a moment there was a brief flicker of something between them, some unspoken understanding that passed in the space between their eyes. The elder nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. Then he turned back to Jack. The path is not clear, he said, his voice quiet but filled with a depth of knowledge. We are lost in many ways. Our people have turned inward for too long. We have abandoned the very principles that once connected us to the stars. We must now decide whether we will return to those roots or continue down a path of isolation and destruction. His gaze shifted to the other elders, who nodded in agreement. The chamber was filled with a deep quiet. Then, as the weight of his words sank in, Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The enormity of the decision was becoming clear. This wasn't just about restoring peace between two worlds, or even finding some kind of mutual understanding. This was about saving an entire civilization from itself, saving them from their own isolation, and the dangers that came with it. But what could he do? He was just one person, just one human who had unknowingly stepped into a role he didn't understand. Yet here he was standing in the heart of the Tzan's ancient temple, at the center of a decision that could change the course of history. Zilara turned to him, then her eyes searching his face. "You've opened the door, Jack, but we cannot walk through it without you," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "We need you now more than ever." Jack felt the weight of her words settle deep within him like a stone sinking into water. It wasn't just about understanding their culture or their technology. It was about connecting with them on a deeper level, helping them rediscover what they had lost, helping them reconnect with the universe and the other species they had turned away from. And that was something he had no training for, no preparation for. All he had was the simple act of kindness that had started it all. But maybe that was enough. Maybe it had always been enough. And maybe now he had a chance to show them what humanity could do when they reached out with nothing but hope and the willingness to connect. The elder's words lingered in the air, long after he spoke, each one hanging like a thread that Jack couldn't quite reach. The weight of what Zilara had said echoed in his mind. As well, they needed him more than ever. But what did that mean? How could a single human make a difference in something so vast, something so ancient? Jack looked around the chamber, the faces of the elders watching him, waiting for him to speak. But no words came to his lips. He had no answers, only the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something enormous. And yet he felt so small, so insignificant. The elder who had spoken earlier regarded him with steady eyes. The silver light in his gaze seemed to see through Jack, as though looking directly into his soul. After what seemed like an eternity, the elder spoke again, his voice heavy with both authority and compassion. "The time for hesitation is over. The prophecy has been set in motion, and now we must act. But before we can move forward, we must understand one thing. Do you believe in the potential of your species?" Jack blinked. The question surprised him. It wasn't something he had expected to hear. He had never been asked to speak for all of humanity, never been asked to defend their place in the universe. But here it was the most important question he could ever be asked. He took a deep breath, his mind racing as he thought about the answer. What was he supposed to say? How could he capture the essence of humanity in just a few words? How could he explain the complexities of human nature? The good, the bad, the kindness, and the cruelty all in one breath? Could he even defend humanity's potential to change and grow after everything that had happened? He looked up at Zilara. Her gaze was steady and patient, waiting for him to find the words. He knew this was important. He could feel it in his bones. So he spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "Yes, I believe in us, in our potential to change, to grow. We've made mistakes, sure. But we've also learned, we found ways to heal from our past. We've always had the ability to reach for something better. And that's what I believe, in the hope that we can be better, that we can find ways to build something good with others, no matter the differences we might have. The room was silent again as the elder regarded him, his expression unreadable. Jack felt the tension thick in the air, as though the very fabric of time was holding its breath, waiting for the council's reaction. Then the elder nodded slowly, his lips curling into a slight smile. "That is the answer we needed to hear," he said, his voice calm and resolute. "You see, Jack, it is not enough to simply believe in yourself or in your species. You must believe in the greater possibility of what you can achieve with others. Humanity has always had the potential to reach out, to connect, to build something that transcends itself. But you must see it as a collective effort, not just as individuals, but as a species that is ready to unite with the stars, with the rest of the universe." Jack's heart thudded in his chest. The enormity of what the elder was saying slowly settled, and he wasn't just a representative of humanity. He was a catalyst for something far bigger than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just about building relationships with its son or even other species. It was about uniting the entire galaxy on a scale Jack couldn't yet comprehend. He wasn't sure if he was ready for all of that. But in that moment, something inside him clicked like a piece falling into place. Suddenly, he realized that this wasn't about having all the answers. It was about believing in the possibility of change, believing that humanity could rise to meet the challenge of something far beyond their current understanding. Zilara turned to him, then her eyes bright with a quiet hope. "Jack, you have the vision to see what we need to do now. The path ahead will not be easy, but with you by our side, we have a chance to make it work." She said, her words filled with an almost reverent sense of trust. Jack nodded, even though he wasn't sure he was ready for what was to come. But he knew one thing for certain: he had stepped into something that couldn't be undone. And he wasn't going to back away. Now he had already started this journey by giving a simple gift, and now it was time to see where that gift would lead them all. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this, but I'll do whatever I can to help," he said, his voice steady. Despite the uncertainty, he felt Zilara smiled, then her expression softening with a sense of gratitude. "That is all we can ask," she said, and the elder who had spoken earlier gave a slight nod, his eyes warm with approval. The council exchanged looks with one another, their silent agreement clear in the way they moved together. The decision had been made. Jack was now part of something far greater than he had ever imagined, and there was no turning back. The air in the chamber shifted once again. The tension that had gripped Jack's chest began to loosen, but only slightly. As the enormity of what was to come settled heavily around him, he could still feel the weight of the elder's gaze on him, their expectations pressing in like a heavy fog. He wasn't sure how to navigate this new reality he had stepped into, but there was no turning back now. The council had made their decision, and now they would move forward together, whatever that meant. Zilara's hand brushed against his arm as she turned to face the council, her expression resolute, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Jack caught it, and for a moment he wondered if she felt the same weight that he did, if she too was uncertain of the path ahead. But she didn't show it. Her face was a mask of calm as she addressed the council once more. "We must begin the process of reconnecting," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "We cannot afford to wait any longer. The prophecy has begun, and the universe is watching. We need to find the others." The elder with the deep blue skin nodded, his silver eyes never leaving Jack's face. "You are correct, Zilara. We must move quickly. Time is not on our side," he said, then his gaze shifted to Jack. "You have already shown us the way. Now it is up to you to help us find the first step forward." Jack's heart skipped a beat, his stomach clenched as the weight of those words sank in. Was he truly the one to guide them into this new era? Was he truly the one to lead them back into the stars? It felt impossible. But then again, what was he supposed to do? Just walk away? He had already made a decision when he handed Zilara the bird. Hadn't he? The simple act had opened something far greater than he could have imagined. But now it was real. It wasn't just some dream or distant idea. Now there was action, there were decisions to be made, and people to guide. Jack didn't have the answers. He had never been in a position like this before, but one thing was clear: whatever happened next would shape not just the Psan but the entire galaxy. He turned to Zilara, looking for some guidance, some reassurance that they were headed in the right direction, but she only gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the responsibility he had accepted. There was no going back now. They were all in this together. Jack swallowed hard, trying to steady his thoughts. The future seemed so uncertain, so fragile, like a thread, ready to snap under the weight of the universe itself. But he had to try, he had to believe that they could make it work somehow. Where do we start? Jack asked, his voice surprisingly calm, given the storm that raged in his mind. Zilara turned to him, her eyes shining with a quiet intensity. We begin by finding the others, the species who were once our allies, the ones who can help us restore the connection. She said, her voice low but determined. We must travel to the worlds where the old bonds were strongest and reach out to them one by one. Jack nodded, his stomach fluttered with both excitement and dread. The unknown was a powerful force, but he couldn't let fear hold him back. Not now. Not when the galaxy itself was waiting for them to act. The council exchanged looks and murmured among themselves. Jack could see that they were all preparing for something big, something that would require everything they had, but there was a sense of unity between them, as though they knew this was the moment. They had all been waiting for the moment that would define their future. At last the elder with the silver eyes spoke again, his voice steady and commanding. We will make preparations for the journey. Zilara will lead you to the first world, where we will attempt to make contact with the remaining allies we have. We will need your guidance. Jack, you are the one who has opened this path, and it is through you that we will rebuild what has been lost. Jack felt a strange sense of pride rise within him at those words, but it was quickly replaced by a deep uncertainty. Was he truly ready for this? Could he really guide them to the stars? Or was he merely a pawn in a much larger game? But even as doubt gnawed at him, he knew there was no going back. They had chosen their path, and now they would follow it together. Zilara placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. We are with you, Jack, she said quietly, her voice full of quiet conviction. Jack looked at her and nodded. Even though his heart was racing, he had made his choice, and now it was time to see where it would take them all. The journey began sooner than Jack had anticipated. The moment the council had made its decision, the weight of the task ahead seemed to fall on his shoulders like an anchor, dragging him deeper into unknown waters. But Zilara was at his side, every step of the way, her calm presence, a steady force against the swirl of uncertainty that threatened to overtake him. They left the temple behind and ventured into the heart of the Tsan world. The streets were quiet now, no longer bustling with the energy of a civilization that had once been on the cusp of greatness. Now there was only silence and the faint hum of technology that had been left to rot in the corners of their abandoned cities. It was a ghost world, a place where the people had lost their connection to everything that had once made them strong. Jack's thoughts churned as they traveled. The landscape was beautiful in a way that was both haunting and serene. The tall trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves glowing with an ethereal light. But there was an emptiness here, an absence that Jack couldn't quite shake. It was like the planet itself had become hollow, like the Tsan had drained it of all its life to focus on their own progress. Jack wondered how they had let it get this far, how they had let themselves become so isolated and detached from everything around them. But then again, wasn't that what humanity had done too? Had they not also lost their way? Had they not also turned inward toward their own destruction? The thought made him uneasy as they walked. Zilara remained silent, her face set in quiet determination. She led him toward the transport ship, where they would begin their journey to the first world, the one that held the remnants of the allies that Tsan had once shared knowledge with. Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision that lay before them. What if they couldn't find anyone? What if the galaxy had already moved on and left the Tsan behind for good? What if the prophecy had been nothing more than a lie? What if all of this was a mistake? He didn't share his doubts with Zilara, though he knew better than to voice them out loud. She was already carrying enough on her shoulders. He didn't want to add to the burden she was bearing. Besides, he had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. Zilara turned to him as they reached the ship, her eyes focused and calm. We're ready, Jack, she said softly, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Jack nodded, even though his heart was still racing. The unknown stretched before him like a vast ocean, and he had no idea how deep it ran or how far they would have to go to find what they were looking for. The ship itself was sleek and efficient, designed for speed and stealth. Jack took a deep breath as he stepped aboard. The familiar hum of the engines beneath his feet was oddly comforting, but it couldn't drown out the nerves that gnawed at him. The ship lifted off the ground with a smooth grace, leaving the Tsan world behind them. As they ascended into the stars, Jack watched as the planet shrank below them. The view from the window was breathtaking, but it only deepened the feeling of isolation that had settled within him. They were leaving everything they knew behind to seek out something that might not even exist anymore, a fleeting hope that the galaxy had not forgotten them. Jack turned his gaze towards Zilara. She was already at the controls, her fingers dancing over the console with practiced ease. She didn't look at him, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her mouth. Even the most composed of beings couldn't hide everything all the time. Jack took a step forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her eyes met his for a brief moment before she looked back at the stars ahead. "Are you sure we can do this, Zilara?" Jack asked, his voice low. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she kept her gaze on the distant stars, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Jack thought she wouldn't answer, but then she spoke, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. "We have no choice, Jack," she said, her words sharp like a declaration of war against the darkness. "This is the only path left to us. If we are to survive, if we are to rediscover who we truly are, then we must take this step, no matter the cost." Jack didn't speak after that. There was nothing more to say. The silence that stretched between them was not uncomfortable, but it was thick with the weight of their shared purpose. As they sailed through the void, he thought about the galaxy stretching out before them, and what it might look like when they reached the first world. What if they found only ruins? What if the Allies had already moved on? What if this entire journey had been for nothing? But as the stars streaked by and the hum of the engines became a comforting rhythm, Jack realized something. He couldn't turn back now. Even if the galaxy was lost, even if this was all a wild chase across the stars, there was no turning back, because something in him had changed, something had shifted when he handed Zilara that simple gift. And now he couldn't let go of it, not even if the universe itself tried to pull him back. The stars stretched out before them, a vast sea of endless possibilities and unknowns. Jack felt the isolation of space surrounding them. It was an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. The feeling of weightlessness seemed to deepen his sense of insignificance. But as they traveled onward, something within him stirred. It was subtle at first, just a faint stirring deep inside his chest. But it grew stronger as the days passed. The ship's journey was taking them farther from everything they knew, from the world they had left behind. But it was also pulling them closer to something else, something greater, something Jack couldn't yet see, but could feel in his bones. Zilara continued to guide them, her focus unwavering. Her hand never strayed from the controls, but Jack could see the flickers of doubt that crossed her face when she thought he wasn't looking. The quiet moments between them became more frequent, but still they didn't speak. Much the unspoken weight of their mission hung between them like a storm cloud waiting to break. Jack understood the burden she carried, but he also knew that she wasn't the only one shouldering it. The silence wasn't just about the distance between them, but about the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Zilara had never fully explained what the prophecy entailed, what they were truly searching for, what they needed to find on the first world. She had only told him enough to keep moving forward. The details, the specifics had been left vague, but Jack had to trust her. She was their guide, and she had never wavered, not once, even when the journey felt impossible, even when the path ahead seemed shrouded in darkness. Jack looked out the window again, watching the stars pass by. They were traveling through the space between worlds, and the expanse felt endless to him, a vast black canvas with no beginning and no end. There were no signs, no clues, just the feeling of moving forward into the unknown with no guarantee of success, and no way of knowing what they would find at the other end of this journey. Zilara turned to him, then her eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "We're getting close, Jack," she said, her voice steady, but there was a slight tremor beneath her words. Jack nodded. Without saying anything, he didn't know what to say. They were getting closer to the unknown. But what if it was a dead end? What if the world they sought had been lost long ago? What if they were too late? What if they had made a mistake, trusting in the prophecy, trusting in his own role in it? All he felt, a cold knot of fear settle in his stomach, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to acknowledge the doubt that had been creeping into his mind. Since they had left the Tsan world, Maybe this was all just a foolish quest chasing after something that didn't exist. Maybe that Zaan were meant to be isolated, meant to fade into history alongside the other lost civilizations of the galaxy. Maybe there was no redemption, no grand cosmic plan. Maybe there was just space and time and the inevitable march of entropy. But then he remembered the bird, the simple gift that had started all of this, the way it had connected him to Zilara, the way it had opened the door to something bigger than either of them. Maybe there was more to the prophecy than he could see. Maybe his doubts were part of the test, part of the journey. Zilara seemed to sense his unease and placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and grounding. "I know you're scared, Jack," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet understanding. "But we are not alone in this. We have each other, and we have the strength of those who came before us, those who believed in the possibility of something greater. We carry that with us in everything we do." Jack looked at her, then really looked at her, and for the first time he saw not just a guide or a warrior, but a person, someone who was just as uncertain as he was, someone who had placed her faith in something that might never come to fruition. But she hadn't given up, and neither could he. They were in this together. And no matter the outcome, he would stand beside her. He had already made that choice, and he would see it through to the end. Zilara smiled at him, a quiet but sincere expression. And in that moment, Jack knew that no matter how dark the path ahead seemed, they would face it together. They would face it with everything they had. The ship's engines hummed softly as they continued on their journey toward the first world, and even though Jack's heart still raced with uncertainty, he felt a new sense of resolve rising within him. The unknown no longer felt like something to fear, it felt like something to embrace, something to conquer. And as the first world grew closer on the horizon, Jack took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever lay ahead. They were on the verge of something new, and no matter what came next, he was ready to face it with Zilara by his side.